I found this little saw at a yard sale. I was attracted by the shape of the handle. Looks like it was previously owned by someone with the initials AV. This side of the saw blade looks like it was painted. So the internet said this was called a compass saw. Let's try it out. What? Oh, whoops. Thanks, Chuck. Actually, compass saws were and are used to make curved cuts called compasses, like for round tabletops. If you have or find an old Disston saw, I recommend visiting the Disston Institute online. This website has an immense amount of information on Disston saws. Henry Disston started making hand saws in the 1840s. By 1855, Disston was the first saw manufacturer in the U.S. to produce its own steel. This gave Disston a business advantage during the high import tariff years that came along with the Civil War. Disston made huge profits supplying steel products to the Union Army. In 1872, Henry Disston purchased a large amount of land in the Tacony section of northeast Philadelphia and created a factory town. Henry Disston and Sons prospered for decades until finally being sold to the H.K. Porter Company in 1955. The Disston division was sold again in 1978 to Sandvik Saw. The Disston brand name still exists today. One of the features of Disston saws that makes them so collectible is the medallion. The design of the medallion changed over the years and can be used to date the saw. Saws from 1888 to 1896 were the first to have the familiar barrel and screw hardware. Notice that Philadelphia is abbreviated Philada with an apostrophe before the last A. My compass saw has the 1896 to 1917 medallion. The Philada doesn't have the apostrophe, and there's a ring embellishment around the keystone symbol. After 1917, the Philadelphia abbreviation was changed to the more familiar Phila. Here's my saw in an 1899 catalog. Notice that the shortest blade offered was 10 inches. My saw blade measures under 8 inches, and the end looks like it's been cut down. The shortened blade probably ruins its value as a collectible, but it's still going to be fun to clean up. The hardware had not been disturbed in a long time. The blade was also very tight. I used paint stripper to remove the silver paint that was on one side of the blade before soaking it in evapo-rust overnight. Here's the blade after soaking in evapo-rust. The teeth look to be in decent shape. I sanded the blade with emery paper, starting with 150 grit. My sanding revealed some etching in the blade. The way the teeth ran into the etching suggested that this blade had been resharpened many times. This also might account for the loss of blade length. I polished the teeth with a wire brush. Here's the blade sanded down to 600 grit. I was careful to preserve the etching. Chuck and I gave the blade a polish by hand with the flitz. If you want a saw sharpening lesson, I would recommend Paul Sellers' videos. Basically, you use a triangular file and sharpen the teeth that bend away from you. I try to follow the angle that is already on the teeth. Then I flip the blade around and do the teeth I skipped at the opposite angle. I started out on the wood handle by scraping the old finish off with a pocket knife. I find that scraping saves clogging sandpaper with the old finish. I started sanding with 100 grit because the wood was in pretty rough shape. I like to use my table saw top as a flat surface when sanding. Here's how the handle looked after sanding through the grits down to 320. The AV initials were very deep and part of this tool's history, so I decided not to try to sand them out. Watco's Danish oil is my go-to finish for saw handles. I think the wood is apple. The Danish oil darkens it and brings out the grain. Finally, I tackled the hardware. I used a hacksaw to clean up the screwdriver slots. I had to use a file in a couple of spots too. I sanded each piece with 600 grit emery paper. And then used some fine steel wool. Chuck was eating lunch, so he watched me flitz each piece from his birdhouse. Here's a before and after comparison. Shining up brass is fun. I tried some brasso and a brass brush on the medallion. This technique worked well polishing the fine details and lettering. I finished off the medallion with the fine steel wool and flitz. Here's what AV's 100-year-old compass saw looked like when I brought it home from the yard sale. I hope AV would be pleased with how it turned out. I sure am. I really enjoy working on old tools made out of my three favorite materials: steel, wood, and brass. I had fun doing this project totally by hand with no power tools. I like to give the wire wheel, belt sander, and Dremel a break sometimes. I used axe wax to finish the saw. I warmed up the saw with my wife's hairdryer before applying a coat of axe wax to the entire saw. I also put a coat of wax on the front of the blade before sliding it back into the handle. I hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching. To test the compass saw out, I cut an arc that would be part of a 24-inch diameter tabletop. I made the cut in a 1-inch pine board. Looks like the old saw did the job.